Hey, what is going on, everybody? In today's video, we are going to be starting up a new mini-series of sorts related to Alliance War, which I am going to be calling War 101. The point of this series is to give some tips and strategies to improving your Alliance War experience. Now, this video may be aimed more towards new and mid-game players who maybe haven't experienced the game mode as much as some others, but I do think there might be some useful tips in here for everyone. Today, we're going to get started with what I want to call Know Your Counters, and this is really the most important tip to Alliance War, mainly for offense specifically, which this video will be going over. But knowing who to attack and with what team, because there's nothing more frustrating than going in and losing a battle that maybe you could or should have been able to win, and I know firsthand how frustrating this game mode can be, so I want to help you guys win your matches a little bit easier. So we're going to start off by going over both how to identify teams properly and using the appropriate war counter for them. Secondly, I want to go over punch-up potential, because this is also really important since a lot of people maybe overestimate what they can do and end up failing and losing, so knowing your limits is very important here. And finally, I want to touch on some of the actual rooms themselves in war and go over the intricacies and what you should be looking out for when attacking in certain rooms. So with that all out of the way, without further ado, let's get this show started. Alright, so let's get things started here, guys. So this is my war defense here, and this is what I'm using right now. And why am I showing this to you guys? Well, this is, again, kind of important to the first part of what we're going to be talking about today, and that's about identifying team counters for when you're going up against other characters. Now, you know, this isn't about what war defense teams you should use, this is just what I use. So from left to right, Astonishing X-Men, Mercs, Pimtech, Doc Ock Sinister Six, this is newly added in recently. Uncanny X-Men, don't ask. This is a weird mixed hybrid team here with Wave 1 Avengers, mainly with Thor, Cap, and Hulk, and then I still have my Marauders and Black Order on defense. Now, why am I telling you this, guys? Well, it's important to identify how you can counter these teams. So I'm using my teams as an example for this. And actually, what a great way to illustrate war counters is actually through the MSF.GG Warbot. So I don't know if you guys use this or not. I actually use this quite frequently in my own Alliance Discord. Very important tool, and I really want to kind of let you guys know that this exists. So if you guys are kind of inexperienced a little bit in Alliance War and Alliance War counters, this is a really great bot tool that kind of helps you tell you, you know, how much you need to punch up, what realistically you can do, and what teams kind of counter that. So, for example, you know, I can pull up my my Discord here, and I'll just kind of do it on my Alliance Discord here really quick. I'll bring this over here, and so you can show this here. So, if you do, for example, it shows on this page here, it shows the kind of commands that you need to do for all of the counters. So let's just take Astonishing X-Men, because that's the first team on my war defense. And so you do this command, it's like, oh, my head's in the way actually. Let's just move that over really quick. I'm gonna move myself over here so it's less in the way. So if you see on the screen here, unfortunately I can't zoom in much further than that. You do like a with squiggly line, C, and then Axeman. I think that was the command there, and it brings up this page here. So we'll open this up, and it actually tells you here, so if you're going up against Astonishing X-Men, it shows you to what degree that you can punch up against these teams. So you can see that 15% punch-ups with Shadowland, 20% with Aimtron, 18% with X-Force, and then of course all these other teams that can still win, but you kind of have to like punch down to realistically win. Now, what's really cool about this as well is you could do slash squiggly line, C, Axeman, and then say 400k. And so you just do 400, and it'll bring you up what kind of team power that you realistically should have when you're going up against the same team. So it does the same thing here. So 350k roughly of Shadowland, 333k for Aimtron, and 340 rounding up for X-Force. So this kind of gives you an idea of sort of what you can do, what teams will beat that team, and sort of what team power you kind of need realistically to beat it. And so going back to my teams here, it also tells you sort of what teams counter what teams. So this really tells you what are good counters. So let's go back to the other page. Here's what I meant to say. So these are really good counters to the Astonishing X-Men, for example. But if you wanted to do Mercs, you know, you could do that too. So you could do /C Merc. I'm pretty sure it's just Mercs, and it brings up all, and Mercs have a lot more counters in this sense. So you can see here all of the different counters that you can use to beat Mercs. This is really important because you don't want to like go into a battle and lose or screw it up or something, it's better to go in and win. Whether or not that's a punch, you know, if you're not confident with what you can punch up, then punching down is always better in this case. So you can see, you know, you get your X-Force, you got your, of course you have the Black Order. They're like one of the top offensive teams. Some uncanny X-Men if you still have them. Baron Zemo with a mixed hybrid team here, Doc Ock, Sinister Six, and so on. So, you know, very useful tool here, I think. I know this is a bit of a cop-out, kind of not explaining my own strategies in this case, but this is actually what I use if I'm unsure about how I want to go about beating certain teams. If I'm uncomfortable or if my alliance is uncomfortable, this is a really great tool. So if you have an alliance Discord and you don't use this bot, I would definitely recommend doing so. You can pick this up off of the msf.gg website, which is really, really nice, and you can get that running for your alliance Discord. And if you don't have Discord, it's a bit more challenging, but I would recommend using this as a really helpful tool. Now, of course, knowing which characters to use against which teams are really important. More and more, we're starting to see a little bit more hybrids coming out, especially when it comes to like mercs. You know, sometimes there's the Shuri mercs. I have the Ultimus mercs. You know, it's hard to say which ones are necessarily better than the others. That's going to depend on, you know, your investment in those characters, but that's what I'm using because I use Shuri elsewhere. But making sure that you go into a team with the right team counter is really important. So for example, for Pimtech, you know, I guess I'm already explaining counters to my own team, but you know, for Pimtech, you know, I would recommend going up against using Brotherhood 2.0, something like that. If you have them, that's really helpful. You know, for mercs, again, you know, using X-Force or Uncanny X-Men can really help, or a Baron Zemo team. For Doc Ock, Sinister Six, you know, Shadowland is really good now. Skilletary can work depending on what you're using and what characters you have there. You know, so going in with the right counters is, and actually you can use Silver Surfer as well for Doc Ock, Sinister Six. And now that we have Kestrel, you know, Uncanny X-Men probably isn't that difficult, and I might need to move that back to my offense once again, because Kestrel's going to sort of obliterate Phoenix now, because now she can't summon. So all of these are really important to knowing what teams can beat what other teams, and making sure that you actually get a win out of that, you know, because it's nothing, it feels bad, you know, when you go up into a team and then you either have to combat cancel because you screwed up really bad, or, you know, you only managed to kill one person because you underestimated or overestimated the potential of your team. And that's what I want to talk about in the second part here, is all about punch-ups, because this is actually really important as well. So, you know, if you're going up against a 400k Astonishing X-Men, you know, don't go in with a, you know, especially if you're new to fighting them. If you're a veteran and you know the punch-ups in and out, you know, that's no problem. But for a lot of other players, you know, I've seen even in my own alliance where people will sort of punch up more than they really should have. And what's really important to know about that actually is the rooms that you're in. So for example, I'm actually situated in the barracks, which has a security debuff. So why is this important? Well, depending on what teams you're using, you know, that security debuff, that defense down, can really make a huge difference in terms of your punch-up potential. So if you're going up against a Black Order, then you would know that Empowered Thanos takes his first turn and does the basic and, you know, zaps, you know, a bunch of people. And that's going to happen with them typically having defense down, and that's going to hit a lot harder than if it wasn't there. So the punch-up potential against this team you would need to have a higher team to compensate for some of these debuffs and for some of these issues, depending on what room you're in, if you're in the cargo bay and so on, reactor, whatever. And we'll talk about more about room-specific details in a little while, but it's really important to know that, you know, some teams are better than others. So I'll actually go into some of my other teams just to illustrate this. So defenders, for example. I know not nobody really uses like the full-on defenders anymore, but if you were to use this team, you know, previously you could punch up 300k against regular defenders with Fantastic Four, for example. So and that was pretty common. But you know, if you go into a stronger team, let's say which one do we want to use? For example, I would probably take the symbiotes. So just out of randomness here. So I have a 770k symbiotes team if I put them on the defense, and now, you know, not everyone is going to be able to punch up that high against them. And then you also have to take into account they have a security debuff. Now this might not be important for all teams. It really depends on the turn order whether or not that security makes a big difference. Like for example, if you're running Skilletary, not that I'd recommend Skilletary against symbiotes, but, you know, Black Widow, for example, will clear out all of that defense up, and it doesn't really make a difference there. So in some team matchups, it doesn't matter. X-Force, for example, they can take their turns beforehand. Shadowland can take their turns beforehand. All of this because of their speed bar increase. So the security debuff actually won't make a huge difference in this sense here. But all of this is really important. So going back to the bot, once again, you know, we can look at, say, I forget actually what the code is for the symbiotes. Do I still have this open? Yeah, I do. So symbiotes would be down here. So CSym, and, you know, we can do mine. So CSym 770, and we get this. So open this up here. So it recommends 600k Black Order, 580k Brotherhood 2.0, and 616k X-Force. Now, it's not to say that other teams can't beat it, because it doesn't actually mention other teams. There are other teams that can beat it, but these are the most reliable counters. So if you were going in with less than this, and actually this doesn't take into account rooms either, but if you were going in with say a 500k X-Force instead of 616, you might still be able to kill a few characters, but you might not be able to get that one shot that you were looking for. So making sure that you're kind of taking the appropriate team power into these characters are what's most important, so you don't fall on your face, make yourself look bad, or feel bad yourself, because I've had a lot of instances, you know, where I've gone in and attacked a team, I failed, I feel terrible, I get frustrated, and, you know, Alliance War is actually the easiest game mode to frustrate me personally, because, you know, I try to do really well, and when I fail, it really, really sucks. So I kind of wanted to kind of share that with you guys, my experiences in Alliance War, and, you know, understanding this sort of mechanic. Now, I'm not going to go over each and every single war team, because they all have their own counters. Like I said, I would recommend checking out the MSF.GG Warbot. This is really helpful, especially if you're you know, less experienced with counters, and knowing this really comes down to your knowledge of the game, being able to know the counters of each and every team. And, you know, if they start doing hybrid variations, kind of knowing what those characters really do and what you could use to counter them, or if one of the traditional counters is going to screw it up. So, for example, I have this Squirrel Girl in here with my 3-Wave 1 and Coulson. So, you know, who you might not want to go in there with is like Brotherhood 2.0. Because then you might land the Magneto Blind, but then my Squirrel Girl is actually going to cleanse that. So it might make it, you know, less good against this team than you might do in other versions, or the basic Wave 1, for example. So keeping in mind how other characters added into the team can really mess up these sort of counters is also really important. And we'll talk about that more in another episode of the series, when I'm going to be going over war hybrids specifically, and how to sort of deal with that and what you can do about that. But that's not the intention of this video here. Now, again, the third part of this video that I want to talk about is room-specific considerations in war. So for here, like I said, I was talking about the security debuff. This is kind of important, you know, depending on what team you're using. If you're going in with an offensively slow team, or they're defensively fast. So, for example, I don't have them anymore, but the Shield Coulson team, the Shield Minion Coulson team, because Nick Fury gives speed up. So all of those minions actually typically go first before other characters. So with defense down, that is really debilitating, because they're all going to get smacked in the face and potentially die. You know, I've gone in with Fantastic Four versus Shield Coulson, and they all go first before my characters. And it's kind of easy to accidentally get one shot on, say, Human Torch or one of your other characters, because they had defense down and took a lot of damage. So that's really important to keep in mind when you're using certain teams against other teams, and really depending on what room that you're going into. So I don't want to share the position of my my war rooms, but we'll jump around really quickly here. So here we are in the reactor. This is me jumping ahead, so I don't actually show the positions of my room. The reactor is a really important room, because there's a lot of teams that actually don't work when it comes to fighting in this room. So right off the bat, you know, things that come to mind, anything with Shuri, you know, if you're using Shuri offensively, it does not work very well, because anyone that has turn 1 buff moves really isn't that great. Because of the disrupt, a lot of that's not going to work. So Shuri comes to mind here. If you apply that defense up, it's not going to work. You know, if you're running X Factor but you use Shatterstar's ultimate, defense up is not going to work. If you're running BKT on the offense, you know, Groot's buffs aren't going to always work there either. There's quite a few more instances. Brotherhood 2.0 is a great one because actually Juggernaut and Blob both rely on buffs on turn 1 on their moves, either triggering a taunt, in this case, or other buffs with Juggernaut. So none of these will work either. So you really need to keep an eye on what teams that you're using in what room. More recently, though, Skill Military or Skilitary actually works quite well in the Reactor because Black Widow now on the T4 under special can clear negative stats effects, so those disrupts actually go away as she cleanses all of that before the speed up, so that's really helpful. But you do really need to keep in mind in some of your more offensive teams, I think Symbiotes might be another one to keep in mind when you're using it in that offensively in Reactor because of Anti-Venom not being able to necessarily, if you're going in with the ultimate, to be able to spread buffs. That's also really important. So there's all these considerations on your offensive team. Some of them aren't really a huge deal. Like for Shadowland, I don't think it's a big deal. More generally, I don't think X Factor is a big deal. X-Force, I don't think is a big deal when it comes to the Reactor room. But there are a few, especially older teams, that you do need to keep in mind. Uncanny X-Men actually is a bit of an issue on the offense in the Reactor room because when Phoenix does her special, I think a lot of them won't get stealth because of the turn order on that team for Disrupt. So do keep that in mind for the Reactor. And there's also one more that I really want to point out. And this one is the cargo bay. So depending on how you line up your teams in war defense, some people think the cargo bay is just kind of like a meh room, but other times it can actually cause, some really random problems. So as you guys know, it applies 10 positive effects to defending allies. This can be literally anything. It can be stealth, it could be immunity, it could be defense up, offense up, these kind of things. I've actually seen a lot of stealth when I'm fighting against the cargo bay, and this can be good or bad depending on what team you're fighting. Because, say if you're fighting against a Drax or a Red Guardian or, I don't know, some weird combos where some tanks, for example, Strife, can get stealth on spawn. It can really screw up what you're trying to do depending on what teams you're using in this room. And it's not very helpful. Sometimes if they spawn with immunity, that might screw up one of your teams that rely heavily on debuffs. So knowing the ins and outs of each of the rooms are really important. Now, I know a lot of people, some strategies are to stack up, heavy defenses in the cargo bay for this reason. And same with the Reactor because they're really shitty sort of like in-room buffs or debuffs in this case. But, I guess that's entirely up to you and how your alliance works. But this room particularly is something that I wanted to point out, the 10 positive effects. I think that's pretty much it. There is a handful of ones that do exist. Like I said, stealth, immunity, I know for sure. Defense up. I don't think deflect is on the list because you can already do that yourself. And I don't know if offense up and speed up and things like that are on there. I know for sure that immunity and stealth are on there. Let me know in the comments down below if there's anything I'm missing about cargo bay, but this is definitely something that you should be thinking about when you're fighting in Alliance War. And finally, I want to point out the bridge as well really quickly. Normally this isn't a huge issue. I've actually found this to be more of an issue in recent days using certain teams, but the counterattack spawn buff is usually not a huge issue. But if you're using AoE attacks or area effect attacks, whatever you want to call them, and you're hitting everyone and it can get counterattacked, this can be really, really bad. I've actually seen it to be a big issue when fighting the Sinister Six, because Doc Ock on a counter will give you a 2-turn slow, and if you have no way of cleansing that, that can be really, really bad. So depending on what team you're using offensively, and if it can get counterattacked, I would be careful about that, because while that might not seem like a huge deal, it can kind of mess up with your tempo or your whatever I want, yeah, you know what I was trying to say. So, it can actually screw up, whether or not you're going to win or not if it's tight. So do keep into mind some of these spawn buffs, when you're going into fighting them. It can make a really big difference. I have lost on occasion because of something like counterattack, which doesn't seem like much. Now, typically things like the engineering defense up and the security defense down, this is largely going to make more of a difference, but there have been times where I have been screwed by a counterattack. So, do keep that in mind when you're going in, that you're going to have to be fighting this. Not to mention that typically, as long as the hanger exists as well, you may or may not get a deflect for yourself, depending on if your hanger is still alive or not when you're going in. So sometimes some of these things can counter other issues, you know, like a deflect can counter a counterattack, for example. But I think that this is a really important thing to keep in mind when you're going into Alliance War. The intricacies of each room is really, really important to make sure that you can min-max as much as you can when you're going up against other teams. So these are the three main rooms. You know, engineering and security have been mentioned a handful of times. Those are really important to keep in mind because they're adjacent room buffs, not actually within the room itself. So any of the rooms attached to them are going to get either defense up and defense down. I don't really need to go over it too much. Specifically, I just wanted to go over the reactor, cargo bay, and the bridge. I think these are the three most important rooms to keep in mind when you're attacking inside of them. Who knows if we're ever going to get some upgrades down the line, because this has been sitting here for so long. This upgrade coming soon button, I think literally since Alliance War came out. So I don't know if that's going to change anytime soon. And if it does, you know, I'll do an update to this video. But I just wanted to share my thoughts with you guys on some of the elements of war that you should keep in mind. So we started off by talking about identifying teams and then war counters. This is really important. And I'll be doing more of this in future videos when I talk about war hybrids and actually like war defense teams and offense teams specifically. This was just a more general guide here. And then secondly, the punch-up potential is really important. So making sure you don't overestimate your own teams, thinking of what you can do and what you can't do. You know, in my opinion, it's better to win than to not win. So if you're not comfortable with the punch-up and you're not experienced with using that team against another team, you know, maybe make sure that you're punching across or even punching a bit down. You know, don't feel bad about doing that because that'll help you get points rather than getting a big fat zero in this case. You know, I've had that happen to me a lot of times. But that's the end of this video, guys. I hope that was informative and helpful. Let me know in the comments down below if I missed anything that I should have brought up. Otherwise, stay tuned for the next episode of the War 101 series, which hopefully won't be too long. So until next time, stay safe. I'll see y'all later. Boylan signing out.